The sound of her horse collapsing in the snow was what finally broke Olivia Anderson's resolve, and she sank to her knees beside the dying animal with tears freezing on her cheeks before she could even wipe them away. Montana territory stretched endlessly white in every direction. The blizzard that had caught her 3 hours past, having transformed the familiar trail into an alien landscape where nothing looked right anymore. She had been trying to reach Quartz Hill, the mining town where her brother supposedly lived, but now she wondered if she would even make it through the night. The year was 1882, and she had traveled all the way from Pennsylvania with dreams of a new beginning, only to find herself facing what might be her ending instead. The mare's breathing grew shallow, then stopped altogether. Olivia pressed her gloved hand against the animal's neck, whispering an apology that the wind snatched away. She had pushed too hard, ignored the warning signs that the storm was worsening, and now both she and her faithful companion were paying the price. Except the horse had paid in full, while Olivia's payment was still being collected by the merciless cold that bit through her wool coat and made her fingers ache even inside her gloves. She pulled herself to her feet, swaying slightly. The wind howled like something alive and angry, and the snow fell so thickly she could barely see 10 feet ahead. Her saddlebags held supplies, but not enough to make camp in this weather. She needed shelter, real shelter, or she would freeze to death before morning. For a moment, she considered simply lying down beside her horse and letting the snow cover them both. The cold was making her thoughts sluggish, dangerous thoughts that she recognized from stories she had heard about people who froze to death. They said it was peaceful at the end, that you just felt warm and tired and then you slept. But Olivia had not traveled 2,000 miles to die within sight of her destination. She had come west for a reason, fleeing memories and mistakes, seeking redemption in a land where nobody knew her past. She grabbed what she could from the saddlebags, leaving behind everything except food, a blanket, and her small leather satchel with her mother's Bible and the last $50 to her name. Then she started walking, trudging through snow that reached past her ankles in some places, praying that she might stumble across some kind of shelter before darkness fell completely. The light was already fading when she saw it. At first she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her, that the cold had addled her brain enough to conjure mirages. But as she pushed forward, the shape resolved itself into something real and solid. A cabin, small and sturdy, with smoke rising from its chimney. The sight of that smoke, proof of warmth and life, nearly made her weep with relief. She stumbled the last 100 yards and practically fell against the door, pounding on it with numb fists. No answer came. She pounded again, harder, and this time heard movement from inside. Heavy footsteps approached, and then the door swung open, flooding her face with blessed warmth that made her skin prickle painfully. The man who stood there was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell nearly to his collar, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore a simple flannel shirt and denim pants, and his weathered face showed the kind of lines that came from years spent outdoors. For a moment, he simply stared at her, his expression somewhere between surprise and alarm. "Please," Olivia managed through chattering teeth. "My horse died. I will freeze if you do not let me inside." Whatever hesitation he might have felt vanished at those words. He reached out, catching her arm as her legs gave way, and half carried her into the cabin. The warmth hit her like a physical force, and suddenly she could not stop shaking. He guided her to a chair near the fireplace, then moved quickly to close the door against the storm. "You need to get those wet clothes off," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "You are going into shock from the cold." Olivia tried to respond, but her teeth were chattering too hard. She fumbled with the buttons of her coat, but her fingers would not cooperate. The man watched for a moment, then stepped forward. "I apologize, but I am going to help you. You will lose fingers to frostbite if we do not get you warm soon." She nodded, beyond caring about propriety. He worked quickly and efficiently, removing her coat and boots, peeling away her wet stockings. His hands were calloused but surprisingly gentle. When he saw the state of her toes, pale and waxy, he cursed softly under his breath. "Stay here," he commanded, then disappeared into another room. He returned moments later with an armful of blankets and what looked like dry clothing. "Put these on. I will turn my back." Olivia's fingers still refused to work properly, but the immediate warmth of the cabin was starting to help. She managed to remove her dress and undergarments, acutely aware of the stranger standing just a few feet away with his back turned. The clothes he had given her were clearly his own, a soft cotton shirt that hung to her knees and wool socks that were too large but blessedly warm and dry. "I am decent," she said quietly. He turned and assessed her with a critical eye, then nodded. "Better. Now sit down and let me check your fingers and toes." She obeyed, settling back into the chair as he knelt before her. He took her hands in his, examining each finger carefully, then did the same with her feet. His touch was clinical, professional almost, and Olivia found herself studying his face as he worked. He had a strong jaw, slightly stubbled, and a nose that looked like it might have been broken at least once. There were scars on his hands, the kind that came from hard work and harder living. "You were lucky," he said finally, sitting back on his heels. "Another hour out there and you would have lost toes for certain. As it is, you will be in pain for a few days, but everything should heal." He paused, then met her eyes. "What in the name of all that is holy were you doing out in that storm?" "Trying to reach Quartz Hill," Olivia said. "I did not realize how bad it would get. By the time I understood, it was too late to turn back." "Quartz Hill is another 15 miles north," he said flatly. "You never would have made it. I know that now." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "I am grateful you were here. Truly I am. I would have died out there." Some of the hardness left his expression. He stood, moving to the stove where a pot of something was simmering. "You need food. When did you last eat?" Olivia had to think about it. "This morning. I had jerky and some hardtack." He ladled stew into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a thick slice of bread. The smell made her stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. She took the bowl with trembling hands and ate without speaking, too focused on the warmth spreading through her belly to worry about manners. The man settled into another chair, watching her eat with an expression she could not quite read. When she finally set the empty bowl aside, he spoke again. "I am Yates Davidson. This is my land about 5 miles south of Quartz Hill. I ranch cattle, or I did until this storm hit." "Olivia Anderson," she replied. "I came from Pennsylvania to find my brother. He is supposed to be in Quartz Hill working one of the silver mines." Yates nodded slowly. "What is his name? I know most of the miners who work the area." "Thomas Anderson. He is 26, tall with red hair like mine." Something flickered across Yates's face there and gone too quickly for her to identify. "I know Thomas. He works the Lucky Strike mine." Relief flooded through her. "He does? Is he well?" "I have not heard from him in over a year, and I was starting to worry." "He was well last I saw him, about a week ago." Yates stood abruptly, moving to the window. "This storm is not letting up. You will need to stay here until it passes. I do not wish to impose." "You do not have a choice," he said, still looking out at the white world beyond. "Even if you wanted to leave, you would not make it 50 yards. The temperature is dropping fast and night is coming on. You stay here or you die. Those are your options." The bluntness of his words stung, but Olivia could not argue with the truth of them. She wrapped the blankets more tightly around herself and stared into the fire, suddenly overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Just this morning, she had been full of hope and anticipation. Now she was stranded in a stranger's cabin, miles from her destination, with no horse and no clear path forward. "I have money," she said quietly. "Not much, but I can pay you for your hospitality once I reach town." "I do not want your money." Yates turned from the window, his expression unreadable in the firelight. "I am not going to throw a woman out into a blizzard to freeze. You can repay me by staying alive and not causing trouble." "I never cause trouble," Olivia said, then immediately regretted the words. They were not exactly true. She had caused plenty of trouble back in Pennsylvania, though not the kind she could explain to this stern stranger. Yates made a sound that might have been a laugh or a snort. "Every person I have ever met who said that was lying. But I suppose I will find out for myself." He moved around the cabin with practiced ease, banking the fire and checking the windows. The place was simple but well maintained, with a main room that served as kitchen and sitting area, and what looked like a small bedroom beyond. Everything was neat and orderly, the kind of space that belonged to someone who lived alone and preferred it that way. "You can have the bed," Yates said. "I will sleep out here by the fire." "I cannot take your bed." "Yes, you can and you will. You nearly froze to death. You need proper rest." His tone brooked no argument. "There is a chamber pot under the bed, and if you need anything else, just call out. I am a light sleeper." Olivia wanted to protest further, but exhaustion was crashing over her like a wave. The warmth of the cabin, the food in her belly, and the lingering shock of her ordeal were all combining to make her eyelids impossibly heavy. She nodded and stood, clutching the blankets around her. "Thank you," she said. "Truly, Yates, you saved my life." He looked at her for a long moment, something complicated crossing his face. "Get some rest, Olivia. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out what comes next." She made her way to the small bedroom, finding it as neat as the rest of the cabin. The bed was simple but looked clean, with heavy quilts piled high. She crawled beneath them fully clothed, still wearing Yates's shirt and socks, and let her eyes close. Through the thin wall, she could hear him moving around the main room, the crackle of the fire, the howl of the wind outside. Sleep came quickly, but it was not restful. She dreamed of snow and cold, of horses dying and doors that would not open no matter how hard she pounded. She dreamed of faces from her past, of her father's anger and her mother's disappointment, of the man she had almost married, and the scandal that had sent her fleeing west. When she woke, gasping, the room was dark except for a thin line of firelight beneath the door. She lay there for a while, listening to the storm rage outside, and wondered what Yates Davidson's story was. He lived alone in this remote cabin, with no mention of family or friends. His hands were scarred and his face weathered, but there was a gentleness in the way he had cared for her, a kindness that did not match his gruff exterior. She wondered what had brought him to this lonely place, what he might be running from or hiding from or simply choosing to avoid. Eventually, she drifted back to sleep, and this time her dreams were quieter, filled with the scent of wood smoke and the sound of wind in pines. When she woke again, pale morning light was filtering through the cabin's small window. The storm still raged outside, though perhaps not quite as violently as the night before. She could hear Yates moving around in the main room, and the smell of coffee reached her nose. Olivia sat up slowly, taking stock of her body. Everything ached, and her feet and hands throbbed with the painful tingling that came with recovering from near frostbite. But she was alive, and that was more than she had dared hope for yesterday evening. She stood and made her way out of the bedroom, still wrapped in one of the blankets. Yates was at the stove, cooking what looked like eggs and bacon. He glanced over his shoulder when he heard her. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," she admitted. "But better than I have any right to feel. Sit down, food will be ready soon." He poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. "You slept for 12 hours. Olivia accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "Did you sleep at all?" "Enough." He returned to the stove, dishing eggs and bacon onto 2 tin plates. "Storm is still going strong. We are not going anywhere today." "How long do these storms usually last?" "Could be a day, could be a week. We have supplies to last either way, so there is no cause for worry." He set a plate in front of her and settled into his own chair with the other. "Tell me about your brother. What made you come all this way looking for him?" Olivia took a bite of eggs, stalling for time. "We were close as children. After our parents died, we only had each other. He came west 3 years ago, sent letters for a while, and then they stopped. I got worried." "So you decided to travel 2,000 miles in the middle of winter?" "I left Pennsylvania in October. I thought I had plenty of time before the worst weather hit." She met his eyes. "And I had reasons for wanting to leave, beyond just finding Thomas." Yates nodded slowly, not pressing for details. "Pennsylvania is coal country. What did you do there?" "I was a teacher, elementary school." It was not exactly a lie. She had taught for a while before everything fell apart. "And you, have you been ranching here long?" "5 years. I have 200 head of cattle, though I will not know how many survive this storm until it passes and I can get out to check on them." He ate methodically, his movements efficient. "I came from Texas originally, worked trail drives until I had enough saved to buy land of my own." "Do you have family in Texas?" Something shuddered in his expression. "Had. My parents died of fever when I was young. My wife and daughter died 6 years ago, also fever. After that, I sold what little I had and came north." The words were spoken flatly, without emotion, but Olivia heard the pain beneath them. She understood that kind of loss, the way it hollowed you out and changed the shape of your life forever. "I am sorry," she said softly. "That is a heavy grief to carry. Everyone carries something." He stood, collecting the empty plates. "The question is what you do with it. Some people let it crush them. Some people run from it. Some people build something new. And which are you?" He paused at the wash basin, his back to her. "Still figuring that out, I suppose." The day passed slowly. The storm showed no signs of abating, and there was little to do except tend the fire and wait. Yates was not much of a conversationalist, but Olivia found his silence companionable rather than oppressive. He had books on a small shelf, worn volumes of Shakespeare and Dickens, and a collection of poetry that surprised her. When she commented on it, he shrugged. "Winter nights are long. A man needs something to occupy his mind." She selected David Copperfield and settled into her chair by the fire, losing herself in the familiar story. Yates worked on what looked like a harness that needed mending, his hands moving with practiced skill. Occasionally, she would glance up and find him watching her, but he always looked away quickly when their eyes met. That evening, as they ate another simple meal, Yates finally broke the comfortable silence with a question that had clearly been on his mind. "What are you really running from, Olivia?" She set down her fork carefully. "What makes you think I am running from anything?" "Because I recognize the look. I have seen it in my own mirror often enough." His gray eyes were steady, neither judging nor demanding, simply waiting. Olivia considered lying or deflecting or changing the subject, but there was something about Yates Davidson's quiet presence that made her want to tell the truth, or at least part of it. "There was a man in Pennsylvania," she said slowly. "A good man by all accounts. Wealthy, well-respected, a deacon in our church. He asked to court me and I agreed. I thought it was what I wanted, what I should want. a secure future, a place in society, all the things a woman is supposed to desire. But, but he was not a good man, not really. He was charming in public and cruel in private. He wanted a wife who would be silent and obedient and never question him. And when I started to pull away, when I told him I had changed my mind about the courtship, he did not take it well. Yates's expression had gone very still. "Did he hurt you?" "He tried." The memory made her throat tight. "We were at a church social. He pulled me aside into a back room and he put his hands on me, told me I had led him on, that I owed him. I fought back. I scratched his face badly enough to leave marks that everyone could see, and then I ran." "Good," Yates said fiercely. "I hope you scarred him." "I did. But he was well liked, and I was just a school teacher with no family to defend me. He told everyone I had thrown myself at him and then attacked him when he rejected me. Most people believed him. I lost my position at the school. My reputation was ruined." She laughed bitterly. "So I took what little money I had and bought a train ticket west. I thought if I could find Thomas, if I could start over somewhere nobody knew me, I might have a chance at a real life." Yates was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You did the right thing," he said. "Leaving, fighting back, all of it. And that man was a coward and a liar. Do not let anyone tell you different." The simple conviction in his voice brought tears to her eyes. She blinked them back, not wanting to cry, but they fell anyway. Yates held her hand through it, not saying anything else, just being present while she let out some of the pain and shame she had been carrying for months. When she finally got control of herself, she wiped her eyes with her free hand. "I am sorry. I did not mean to burden you with all of that. It is not a burden." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "And you have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing." That night, as Olivia lay in Yates's bed once more, she found herself thinking about the scarred, lonely cowboy in the next room. He had shown her more kindness and understanding in 2 days than most people had in her entire life. There was a gentleness to him that belied his rough exterior, a thoughtfulness that suggested depths she had only begun to glimpse. She told herself not to read too much into it. He was simply a decent man helping someone in need. Once the storm passed, she would make her way to Quartz Hill, find Thomas, and start building the new life she had come west to find. Yates Davidson would become just a memory, the man who saved her from freezing to death in a Montana blizzard. But even as she thought it, some part of her knew it would not be that simple. Something had shifted between them over their shared meals and quiet conversations. Something fragile but real, like the first green shoots pushing through snow in early spring. The storm continued for 3 more days. During that time, Olivia and Yates fell into an easy routine. They cooked together, ate together, read by the fire in the evenings. They talked about books and weather and the challenges of life on the frontier. Yates told her about ranching, about the brutal work of it, but also the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. Olivia talked about teaching, about the joy of watching children learn to read, and the frustration of dealing with parents who did not value education. They avoided the deeper subjects by unspoken agreement, staying on safe ground. But there were moments when their eyes would meet across the cabin, and Olivia would feel something electric pass between them. She caught herself watching the way his hands moved as he worked, the way the firelight cast shadows across his strong features. Once, she looked up from her book to find him staring at her with an expression of such naked longing that it took her breath away. He looked away immediately, but the moment lingered between them. On the 4th morning, Olivia woke to silence. The constant howl of wind that had become background noise was gone. She rushed to the window and saw blue sky, brilliant sunshine reflecting off snow that sparkled like diamonds. The storm had finally passed. She should have been relieved. Instead, she felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Once the storm was over, there would be no reason for her to stay. Yates would take her to Quartz Hill. She would find Thomas, and this strange interlude would be over. When she emerged from the bedroom, Yates was already dressed in his heavy coat and boots. "Storm is done. I need to go check on my cattle, see how many made it through. You should stay here where it is warm. Can I come with you?" The words were out before she could stop them. "I would like to help if I can." He looked surprised. "It will be cold work, and we might find dead animals. It is not pleasant. I grew up on a farm before we moved to the city. I am not afraid of hard work or death." She met his eyes steadily. "Please, I do not want to just sit here waiting." Something like approval crossed his face. "All right, but you will need warmer clothes than what you are wearing." He found her spare clothes of his that she could layer, along with an extra coat and a pair of boots that were far too large but could be made to work with extra socks. She looked ridiculous, swimming in clothes made for a man half a foot taller, but she was warm, and that was what mattered. They set out into a world transformed. The snow was 3 feet deep in places, pristine and unmarked. The sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at, and the air was so cold it burned in Olivia's lungs. Yates led the way, breaking trail, his long legs making easier work of the deep snow than she could manage. But she kept pace, determined not to slow him down. The cattle had sheltered in a grove of pines on the eastern edge of his property. As they approached, Olivia could see dark shapes moving among the trees. Many of the animals had survived, their shaggy winter coats protecting them from the worst of the cold. But there were casualties too. Yates counted silently as they moved through the herd, his expression growing grimmer with each still form they found in the snow. 23 lost, he said finally. "Could have been worse, but it is still a hard blow. I am sorry." Olivia did not know what else to say. Those 23 dead cattle represented not just animals but money, livelihood, survival, such as ranching. He turned to look at the surviving herd. "I will need to dig out the barn, make sure I can get them fed and watered. The work will take me most of the day. Then let us get started." They worked side by side for hours, shoveling snow, hauling hay, breaking ice on the water trough. It was brutal labor, and Olivia's soft teacher's hands were soon blistered and aching despite the gloves Yates had given her. But she did not complain. There was something deeply satisfying about the work, about being useful, about working alongside this quiet man, whose respect she was beginning to value more than she wanted to admit. When they finally returned to the cabin as the sun was setting, they were both exhausted and frozen. Yates built up the fire while Olivia started on supper, falling back into the pattern they had established over the past few days. But there was a new awareness between them now, a sense of partnership that went beyond host and stranded traveler. As they ate, Yates finally addressed the topic they had both been avoiding. "The road to Quartz Hill should be passable by tomorrow. I can take you in the morning if you like." Olivia's heart sank, even though she had known this moment was coming. "That would be very kind of you." "I am eager to see Thomas to make sure he is well." Yates nodded, but he did not look happy about it. "You will want to be careful in town. It is rough, like most mining towns. Lots of men with more money than sense and more drink than either. Thomas should be able to help you find respectable lodging." "I am sure I will manage. I have dealt with difficult men before." "I know you have." His eyes met hers across the table. "But if you need anything, anything at all, my door is always open. You remember that." "I will." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Yates, for everything. I know I have said it before, but I mean it. You saved my life and you treated me with kindness when you could have just as easily turned me away. I would never turn anyone away from shelter in a storm." But the way he was looking at her suggested there was more to it than simple hospitality. "You are welcome here, Olivia. Always." The word always hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to speak aloud. Olivia looked down at her plate, her heart beating too fast. This was foolish. She barely knew this man. A few days in a cabin did not mean anything, could not mean anything. She had come west to find her brother and start fresh, not to develop feelings for the first man who showed her kindness. But as she lay in bed that night, her last night in Yates's cabin, she could not stop thinking about him. About the gentleness in his scarred hands, the intelligence in his gray eyes, the way he had listened to her story without judgment. About the life he had built in this remote place, solitary but not lonely, independent but not isolated. About the way something in her chest tightened when she thought about saying goodbye. She told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural affection that comes from being saved from death. But she knew, deep in her bones, that it was more than that. Somehow, in just a few days, Yates Davidson had become important to her, and the thought of leaving him behind made her heart ache in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Yates had a horse and a sturdy cart, and he loaded them both for the journey to Quartz Hill. Olivia wore her own dress, dried and brushed clean, though she kept Yates's wool socks because her own had never quite recovered from their soaking. She carried her small satchel with her few possessions and tried to ignore the leaden feeling in her stomach. The ride to town took most of the morning. The main road had been packed down by other travelers, making the going easier than Olivia had expected. Yates drove in silence, his attention on the horse and the road, but Olivia caught him glancing at her more than once when he thought she was not looking. Quartz Hill appeared on the horizon gradually, first just a smudge of smoke against the blue sky, then individual buildings taking shape. It was larger than Olivia had expected, a real town rather than just a mining camp. The main street was lined with storefronts and saloons, and she could see several church steeples rising above the other buildings. People moved along the boardwalks despite the cold, going about their business with determined purpose. Yates guided the cart to a stop in front of a building with a sign that read, "Lucky Strike Mine Company Office." "This is where Thomas works, or at least where he gets his wages. Someone inside should be able to tell us where to find him." They climbed down from the cart and entered the office, a cramped space dominated by a large desk covered in papers and ledgers. A balding man in spectacles looked up as they entered. "Help you?" "We are looking for Thomas Anderson," Yates said. "He works for the Lucky Strike." The man's expression shifted to something Olivia could not quite read, surprise maybe or concern. "Thomas Anderson, red hair, about 6 feet tall." "Yes," Olivia said eagerly. "That is my brother." "Can you tell us where to find him?" The man removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly, not meeting her eyes. "I am sorry to have to tell you this, miss, but Thomas Anderson passed away 3 weeks ago." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Olivia heard the words but could not make sense of them. No, that cannot be right. He was alive. He was working here." "There was an accident in the mine, a cave-in. 3 men were killed, Thomas among them. I am very sorry for your loss." The man's voice was kind but matter-of-fact, the tone of someone who had delivered this kind of news before. "If you are family, there are some possessions we have been holding. I can get them for you." Olivia could not speak. She felt Yates's hand on her arm steadying her, but it seemed very far away. Thomas was dead. Her brother, her only living family, the person she had crossed a continent to find, was dead, and she had not even known. While she was traveling west with hope in her heart, he had already been buried in Montana ground. "Yes," Yates said, when it became clear Olivia could not respond. "We would appreciate that." The man retrieved a small wooden box from a back room and set it on the desk. Inside were a few items: a pocket watch that had belonged to their father, some letters, a small amount of money, and a photograph of Olivia and Thomas as children. She picked up the photograph with trembling hands, looking at their young, smiling faces, and felt something break inside her. "Was there a funeral?" she managed to ask. "Yes, miss. He is buried in the town cemetery along with the other men who died. The company paid for a proper service and a headstone." "Thank you." The words came out barely above a whisper. Yates took charge then, asking practical questions about the burial location and whether there were any outstanding debts. The man assured him that Thomas had died owing nothing, and that the small amount of back wages in the box represented everything the company owed him. Then Yates was guiding Olivia back outside, back to the cart, his hand firm on her arm as if he was afraid she might collapse. She felt numb, detached, like she was watching this happen to someone else. Yates drove them to the cemetery without being asked, somehow knowing that she would need to see it for herself. They found the grave easily enough, a simple wooden marker bearing Thomas's name and dates. Olivia stood before it, staring at the frozen ground, and tried to feel something. But the shock was too great. Everything she had been working toward for months, the whole purpose of her journey west, had been erased in a single sentence. "I am so sorry, Olivia." Yates's voice was rough with emotion. "I wish I had known. I could have told you, saved you from learning it this way. You said you saw him a week ago." The accusation in her voice was not fair, but she could not help it. "I said I had seen him a week ago when you first asked. But that was before I knew who you were, before the storm. I had not actually seen him in over a month. I just assumed he was still working. Men come and go in mining towns. I did not think to ask." Olivia knew he was not to blame, but part of her wanted to lash out anyway, wanted to make someone else feel the pain that was tearing through her. Instead, she sank to her knees in the snow beside her brother's grave and finally let herself cry. Great, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere deep in her core, releasing all the grief and fear and disappointment she had been holding back. Yates knelt beside her and pulled her against his chest, holding her while she fell apart. His arms were strong and solid, an anchor in a world that had just tilted off its axis. She cried until she had no tears left, until she was empty and exhausted and hollow. When she finally pulled back, Yates produced a handkerchief and let her clean her face. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. It was beautiful in a way that made her want to scream. How dare the world be beautiful when Thomas was dead? "What will you do now?" Yates asked gently. The question brought her up short. What would she do? She had no money to speak of, no family, no plan beyond finding Thomas. She was stranded in a Montana mining town in the middle of winter with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. "I do not know," she admitted. "I suppose I will need to find work. There must be a school here that needs a teacher, or perhaps I could work in one of the shops. Or you could come back to the cabin." She looked at him sharply. "What? Come back with me? Stay through the winter at least. Give yourself time to grieve, to figure out what you want to do next." He was watching her intently, his gray eyes serious. "I could use the help with the ranch, and I would feel better knowing you were somewhere safe rather than alone in a rough mining town. Yates, I cannot just move into your cabin. People would talk. Let them talk." "I do not care what people think, and you should not either." His jaw set stubbornly. "Besides, it is practical. I need help with the ranch work and you need a place to stay. We can figure out the rest as we go." Olivia knew she should refuse. It was improper, scandalous even, for an unmarried woman to live with an unmarried man. But propriety seemed like a distant concern compared to the yawning emptiness before her. And the truth was, she did not want to be alone. The thought of staying in some boarding house in Quartz Hill, surrounded by strangers with nothing but her grief for company, was unbearable. "Are you certain?" she asked. "You have already done so much for me." "I am certain." He stood and offered her his hand, pulling her to her feet. "Come home, Olivia, at least for now. The rest can wait. Home." The words settled into her chest, unexpected and warm. She looked at Thomas's grave one more time, silently promising him that she would return, that she would not abandon him here. Then she let Yates lead her back to the cart. They returned to the cabin as night was falling. Olivia felt wrung out, emptied of everything except exhaustion. Yates settled her by the fire and made her tea, then fixed a simple supper that she could barely taste. She went to bed early, too tired to do anything else, and slept a deep, dreamless sleep. The days that followed blurred together. Olivia moved through them in a fog of grief, going through the motions of living without really being present. Yates let her be, giving her space to process her loss while making sure she ate and slept and stayed warm. He did not try to cheer her up or tell her things would get better. He simply stayed, a quiet, solid presence that asked nothing of her. Slowly, gradually, the numbness began to fade. Olivia started to notice things again. The way the morning light slanted through the cabin windows, the smell of coffee brewing, the sound of Yates chopping wood outside. She began helping with small tasks around the cabin, needing something to do with her hands, some way to feel useful. One morning, about 2 weeks after learning of Thomas's death, Olivia woke before dawn and could not fall back asleep. She rose and dressed quietly, not wanting to disturb Yates, who was sleeping by the fire as he had every night since she returned. She slipped outside into the pre-dawn darkness and stood looking up at the stars, breathing the cold, clean air. She heard the cabin door open and close, then Yates's footsteps approaching. He did not say anything, just came to stand beside her, two people watching the sky lighten from black to gray to pink. "I keep thinking about all the things I wanted to tell him," Olivia said finally. "All the conversations we will never have. I was so focused on finding him that I never let myself consider he might already be gone." "That is the thing about loss," Yates said quietly. "It does not wait for convenient times or proper goodbyes. It just takes what it wants and leaves you to figure out how to go on. How did you do it? After your wife and daughter died, how did you keep going?" He was silent for a long moment. "Honestly, I did not at first. I drank too much and picked fights and generally made a mess of things. It took me a long time to understand that I had a choice. I could let the grief destroy me, or I could choose to live in a way that would honor their memory. So I came here, bought land, built something. Some days it feels like enough. Other days it does not, but I keep going anyway." "I do not know how to keep going," Olivia admitted. "Thomas was my reason for coming west. Without him, I do not know what I am supposed to do." Yates turned to face her, his expression earnest in the growing light. "Then do not decide right now. Stay here, help me with the ranch. Let yourself heal. When you are ready, you will know what comes next." "What if I never know?" "Then you will figure it out as you go, same as the rest of us." He smiled slightly. "Life does not come with a map, Olivia. We all just muddle through the best we can." The sun broke over the horizon, flooding the snowy landscape with golden light. Olivia felt something shift inside her, not healing exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. A sense that while her world had been broken, it was not beyond repair. She looked at Yates, really looked at him, and saw the same brokenness in him that she felt in herself. They were both scarred, both grieving, both trying to piece together lives from the wreckage of loss. But there was strength in him too, a quiet resilience that gave her hope. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me time, for not pushing me to be all right before I am ready." "That is what you do for people you care about," he said simply. "You give them time." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. People you care about. Was that what they were becoming? More than host and guest, more than two strangers thrown together by circumstance. Olivia was not ready to examine that question too closely. But as they stood together watching the sunrise, she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the growing light. The winter deepened, and life at the cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. Olivia took over most of the cooking and household tasks, while Yates handled the heavy outdoor work. But they often worked together too, tending the cattle, repairing fences, splitting wood. The hard physical labor was good for Olivia, giving her tired muscles and a sense of accomplishment that helped quiet her grieving mind. They talked as they worked, long conversations about everything and nothing. Yates told her about his childhood in Texas, about learning to rope and ride almost before he could walk. Olivia talked about Pennsylvania, about teaching children to read and the satisfaction of watching comprehension dawn in young eyes. They discussed books and debated philosophy, and argued good-naturedly about whether coffee was better black or with cream. What they did not discuss was the future, or what Olivia would do when spring came. That felt too large, too complicated. It was easier to simply exist in the present, taking each day as it came. But the attraction between them was becoming harder to ignore. Olivia caught herself watching Yates more and more often, admiring the way he moved with unconscious grace, the way his face softened when he smiled, the way his hands looked as he worked. Sometimes she would look up to find him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. They were careful not to touch more than necessary, maintaining a respectful distance even in the small space of the cabin. But the air between them felt charged, electric with possibility. Once, reaching for the same book on the shelf, their hands brushed and both of them froze. The contact lasted only a second before they pulled away, but Olivia felt the jolt of it all the way to her toes. She knew she was in dangerous territory. Getting involved with Yates would be foolish for so many reasons. She was grieving, vulnerable, not thinking clearly. He had been kind to her, but that did not mean he wanted anything more than companionship. And even if he did, what kind of future could they have? She was a teacher from Pennsylvania, and he was a Montana rancher. Their worlds were completely different. But the heart does not listen to reason, and Olivia was beginning to realize that what she felt for Yates Davidson went far deeper than gratitude or simple attraction. She was falling in love with him, with his quiet strength and gentle kindness, with the way he treated her as an equal rather than a burden, with the life he had built in this beautiful, harsh place. The realization terrified her. She had sworn she would never let herself be vulnerable to a man again after what had happened in Pennsylvania. But Yates was nothing like the cruel deacon who had tried to force himself on her. Yates listened when she spoke. He respected her opinions. He never tried to control or diminish her. He simply accepted her as she was, broken pieces and all. Still, she kept her feelings to herself. The winter would end eventually, and she would need to make decisions about her future. It would be easier to do that if she had not complicated everything by falling in love. One evening in late February, a Chinook wind blew through, bringing with it the first real hint of spring. The temperature rose dramatically, and the snow began to melt in earnest, running in little rivulets down the sides of the cabin. Yates stood by the window, watching the transformation with a troubled expression. "Spring will be here soon," he said. "Another month, maybe two, and the roads will be clear for travel." Olivia felt her stomach clench. "Yes, I suppose they will. You will need to decide what you want to do. Whether you want to stay in Montana or go back east. Whether you want to stay in Quartz Hill or move on to somewhere else." He turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "I want you to know that you are welcome to stay here as long as you like, but I also do not want you to feel obligated. You do not owe me anything. I do not feel obligated." The words came out more sharply than she intended. "Is that what you think? That I am only staying out of some sense of debt? I do not know what to think." Frustration crept into his voice. "You never talk about the future, never mention what you might want to do. For all I know, you are counting the days until you can leave." "I am not counting the days." Olivia stood, suddenly unable to sit still. "I am trying not to think about leaving at all because the thought of it makes me miserable." Yates went very still. "Why would it make you miserable?" "Because I do not want to leave." The admission burst out of her before she could stop it. "Because I am happy here, happier than I have been in years. Because this cabin feels more like home than anywhere I have lived since my parents died. Because—" She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "Because what?" Yates crossed the room in 3 long strides, standing close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Say it, Olivia." "Because of you," she whispered. "Because I have fallen in love with you, and I do not know what to do about it." For a moment he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his hand came up to cup her face, his calloused thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "You have fallen in love with me," he repeated slowly, as if testing the words. "I know it is foolish. I know I should not. But I cannot help it. You are good and kind and strong, and you make me feel safe in a way I never have before. You make me want to stay, to build a life here, even though I know that is probably impossible." "Why is it impossible?" His voice had gone low and rough. "Because you have not said you feel the same way. Because we barely know each other. Because I am still grieving my brother and probably not thinking clearly. Pick a reason. There are plenty. I have been in love with you since the second week you were here." The words were blunt, matter-of-fact, stunning in their directness. "I was trying to be respectful, trying to give you space to heal without pressuring you. But I have been half out of my mind wanting you, wanting to tell you how I feel, wanting to ask you to stay." Olivia's breath caught. "You have?" "Yes. I love you, Olivia Anderson. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you refuse to give up even when the world knocked you down. I love the way you throw yourself into ranch work even though it is not what you were raised to do. I love the sound of your laugh and the way you argue with me about books. I love everything about you, and I want you to stay. Not as a guest or an employee, but as my wife, if you will have me." "Your wife?" The word came out as barely more than a breath. "I am not a rich man, and this is a hard life. But I would spend every day trying to make you happy. I would work myself to the bone to give you everything you deserve. I would love you and protect you and stand beside you for as long as I draw breath." His gray eyes were fierce with emotion. "Marry me, Olivia. Stay here and build a life with me." She should have hesitated. She should have asked for time to think, to consider all the practical implications. But Olivia was done being practical. She had been practical in Pennsylvania, and it had nearly destroyed her. This moment, this man, this feeling of rightness was worth taking a risk for. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." The smile that broke across Yates's face was like the sun coming out. Then he was kissing her, and Olivia melted into him, wrapping her arms around his neck. The kiss was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking the fragile moment. But then it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more consuming. Olivia felt like she was on fire, years of loneliness and longing pouring out in that single kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly," he said. "Court you the right way, give you time to be sure. We can wait until spring to marry, have a proper wedding in town." "I do not need a proper wedding," Olivia said. "And I do not need more time. I am sure, Yates. I have never been more sure of anything. Are you certain? I do not want you to have regrets. The only thing I would regret is waiting." She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. "I have spent too much of my life being afraid, being cautious, following rules that other people made. I am done with that. I love you and I want to marry you, and I do not care if people think it is too fast or improper. Do you?" "No." His arms tightened around her. "No, I do not care what anyone thinks. If you are sure, then we will do it your way." They rode into Quartz Hill 2 days later and were married by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through. There were no guests, no flowers, no elaborate ceremony. Just Olivia and Yates standing before a man of God, speaking the words that bound them together as husband and wife. Olivia wore her best dress, the one she had been saving for meeting Thomas, and Yates wore a clean shirt and had actually trimmed his hair. They exchanged simple gold bands that Yates had bought from the general store, and when the preacher pronounced them married, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that made her eyes sting with happy tears. They filed the marriage certificate at the town office, making it legal and official, then bought supplies and headed back to the cabin. Their cabin now, Olivia thought with a thrill of joy. Their home. That night, as man and wife for the first time, they came together in Yates's bed. Their bed. Yates was gentle and patient, taking his time to make sure she felt safe and cherished. Olivia gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back, and discovered that physical intimacy with someone you loved was nothing like the brutal pawing she had endured in Pennsylvania. This was beautiful, overwhelming, a joining of not just bodies but souls. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Yates traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "I never thought I would have this again," he admitted quietly. "After Sarah and Emma died, I convinced myself that part of my life was over, that I would just work the ranch and grow old alone, and I was mostly at peace with that. But then you showed up on my doorstep, half frozen and completely stubborn, and everything changed." "I am glad I showed up on your doorstep," Olivia said, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Even if the circumstances were terrible, even though I lost Thomas, I cannot regret the path that led me here, to you." "You think Thomas would have approved, of us, I mean?" Olivia considered the question. She wished desperately that she could have introduced Yates to her brother, that Thomas could have met the man she married. But in her heart, she thought he would have been happy for her. "I think he would have liked you," she said finally. "Thomas always wanted me to be happy, to find someone who would treat me well. I think he would have approved. I hope so." Yates pulled her closer. "I promise you, Olivia, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," she said fiercely. "You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." They made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and responses. And when they finally fell asleep, Olivia felt a peace she had not known since childhood, a sense of being exactly where she belonged. Spring came gradually, the snow melting to reveal brown grass that would soon turn green. The cattle grew sleek and fat on the new growth, and Yates was pleased to find that most of his herd had survived the brutal winter. Olivia threw herself into ranch life with determination, learning to milk cows and churn butter, to tend a vegetable garden and preserve food for the coming winter. It was hard work, harder than anything she had done as a teacher, but she loved it. She loved the satisfaction of seeing tangible results from her labor, loved working alongside her husband, loved the life they were building together. They went into Quartz Hill once a month for supplies and to attend church. Olivia visited Thomas's grave each time, bringing flowers when they were in season and clearing away the weeds that tried to overtake the plot. She talked to him, telling him about her life with Yates, hoping somehow he could hear her and know that she was all right. The townspeople accepted her presence with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion. Some thought it scandalous that she had married Yates so quickly after arriving in Montana. Others thought it was romantic, a love story forged in the crucible of winter hardship. Olivia did not much care what they thought. She had learned the hard way that other people's opinions were not worth sacrificing her happiness. She did make a few friends, particularly among the other ranch wives who understood the demands of frontier life. There was Martha Henley, whose husband ran cattle on land adjacent to theirs, and Louise Chen, whose family owned the general store in town. These women became her confidants and companions, providing female friendship that Olivia had not realized how much she missed. As summer approached, Olivia began to suspect she might be pregnant. Her courses had not come for 2 months, and she felt tired and vaguely nauseous in the mornings. She waited until she was certain before telling Yates, not wanting to raise his hopes only to disappoint him. When she finally shared the news one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Yates went very still. A baby. His voice was rough with emotion. "You are certain?" "As certain as I can be without seeing a doctor. But yes, I believe so. In the fall, probably October." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. When he finally released her enough to see his face, she saw tears tracking down his cheeks. "I thought I would never have this again," he said. "After Emma died, I never imagined I would have another child. Olivia, you have given me back everything I lost, more than I lost. We will have a family," she said, her own eyes filling. "Our family. A new beginning for both of us." Yates dropped to his knees and pressed his ear against her still flat belly as if he could hear the new life growing inside. Olivia rested her hands on his head, running her fingers through his hair, and felt a love so intense it was almost painful. This man, this life, this child they had created together. It was more than she had ever dared to hope for. The pregnancy progressed well, though the summer heat made Olivia uncomfortable, and the morning sickness lasted longer than she would have liked. Yates was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worried that she was working too hard or not resting enough. Olivia tolerated his hovering with amused patience, understanding that his fear came from having lost a wife and child before. "I am not fragile," she told him one day when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I am not going to break." "I know," he said, but he took the basket anyway. "Humor me. I lost Sarah when Emma was born. The doctor said there were complications, that she bled too much. I cannot lose you, Olivia. I cannot go through that again." His raw honesty made her heart ache. She cupped his face in her hands, making him meet her eyes. "You will not lose me. I am strong and I will fight to stay with you and our baby. I promise you that." "You cannot promise that. Nobody can." "Then I promise I will do everything in my power to come back to you. And you have to trust that it will be enough." As her belly swelled and the baby grew, Olivia felt her own fears rising. Childbirth was dangerous on the frontier, where doctors were scarce and complications could turn deadly quickly. But she pushed the fear down, refusing to let it control her. She was done living in fear. Whatever happened, she would face it with courage. In late September, Martha Henley's wife, who had experience as a midwife, came to stay at the cabin to be there when the baby arrived. Her name was also Martha, which caused some confusion but also some laughter. Martha moved into the main room, giving Olivia and Yates privacy while still being close enough to help when the time came. The labor started on an October morning, mild cramping that gradually intensified over the course of the day. By evening, the pains were coming regularly, and Martha took charge, setting up the bedroom and boiling water and giving Yates tasks to keep him occupied. The labor continued through the night, hard and exhausting, Olivia gritting her teeth through contractions that felt like they might split her in two. Yates stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement even though his face was pale with fear. Martha coached her through the pushing, and just as dawn was breaking, Olivia gave one final tremendous push and felt the baby slip free. The sound of a baby crying filled the cabin, the most beautiful sound Olivia had ever heard. Martha worked quickly, cleaning the infant and wrapping it in soft blankets before placing the baby in Olivia's arms. "It is a boy," Martha announced with a smile. "A healthy, beautiful boy." Olivia looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect face and shock of dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. Yates leaned over them both, his face transformed with wonder and joy. "He is perfect," Yates whispered. "Olivia, he is absolutely perfect." "What shall we name him?" Olivia asked. "Thomas," Yates said immediately. "If that is all right with you, for your brother." Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks. "Thomas, yes, Thomas Yates Davidson." They spent the next hour marveling over their son, counting his tiny fingers and toes, watching him root for his first feeding. Martha finally shooed Yates out so Olivia could rest, and Olivia drifted off to sleep with Thomas tucked safely beside her, feeling more complete than she had ever felt in her life. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and alert, with Yates's gray eyes and Olivia's red hair. He grew quickly, hitting each milestone right on schedule, bringing joy to the cabin that had once been so lonely. Yates was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son. He carved toys for Thomas and sang him lullabies in a surprisingly pleasant baritone. He changed diapers without complaint and walked the floor with the baby when he was fussy. Watching him with their son, Olivia fell in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates expanded the herd and built additional outbuildings. Olivia's garden flourished, providing vegetables that she learned to preserve for winter. They worked hard, but they also made time for joy, for family dinners and quiet evenings by the fire, for teaching Thomas his first words and watching him take his first steps. When Thomas was 2 years old, Olivia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, a girl arrived the following spring, a tiny thing with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. They named her Emma Sarah, honoring both of Yates's lost daughter and wife, confident enough in their own family to acknowledge the ghosts of the past without being haunted by them. The cabin began to feel too small for their growing family, so Yates built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and expanding the main living space. Olivia planted flower gardens and hung curtains she had sewn herself, transforming the simple structure into a real home. Years passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and had his mother's quick mind. Emma was bright and fearless, always getting into mischief and making everyone laugh. When Thomas was 6 and Emma was 4, another son arrived whom they named Samuel after Yates's father. Then 2 years later came another daughter, Rebecca, completing their family of 6. The ranch thrived under Yates's careful management. He bought more land and hired a few hands to help with the heavy work, becoming one of the more successful ranchers in the area. But success never changed him. He remained the same quiet, steady man Olivia had fallen in love with, devoted to his family and his land. Olivia found fulfillment in motherhood, but she also missed teaching. When Thomas was old enough to start learning to read, she began tutoring not just her own children, but also the children of neighboring ranchers. Word spread, and soon she had a small school operating out of a room in their expanded cabin, teaching reading and arithmetic to a dozen students of various ages. It was not the formal teaching position she had once held in Pennsylvania, but it was satisfying in its own way, and she loved seeing young minds develop and grow. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Olivia back to the spot where he had first found her, stumbling through the snow toward his cabin. It was summer now, and the landscape was green and lush instead of white and frozen. They stood together looking at the view, their hands intertwined. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up the life you might have had?" Olivia turned to face him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "Never, not for a single moment. You gave me everything I ever wanted, even when I did not know I wanted it. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love. How could I ever regret that? I love you, Olivia Davidson, more today than the day I married you, which I would not have thought possible. I love you too, always and forever." They kissed there in the sunshine. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life from broken pieces, who had learned that sometimes the things you do not plan for turn out to be exactly what you need. As they rode back to the ranch, back to their children and their life, Olivia thought about the journey that had brought her here. The scandal in Pennsylvania, the long trip west, the blizzard that had nearly killed her, the brother she had lost. All of it had been painful, but all of it had led her to this moment, to this place, to this man. Winter had brought her to his lonely cabin, and in doing so, had given them both a second chance at happiness. She had arrived broken and lost, seeking a brother she would never see again. Instead, she had found a husband, a family, and a home in the wild beauty of Montana Territory. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken equipment, all the struggles that came with frontier ranching. But there were also births and birthdays, holidays and harvest celebrations, quiet evenings by the fire and loud, chaotic family dinners. Thomas grew into a tall, thoughtful young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. At 18, he began courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Alice who fit into their family as if she had always belonged. Emma inherited her mother's love of learning and announced her intention to become a teacher, following in Olivia's footsteps. Samuel was the adventurous one, always wanting to explore beyond the boundaries of their land, talking about seeing the ocean someday. Rebecca, the baby of the family, was a talented artist who filled the cabin with drawings and paintings. When Olivia was 42, Yates surprised her by taking her on a trip to Quartz Hill to see the new opera house that had been built there. Montana had become a state by then, and Quartz Hill had grown from a rough mining town into a proper city with paved streets and electric lights. They dressed in their finest clothes and attended a performance of La Traviata, sitting in the balcony and holding hands like young lovers. "Thank you for this," Olivia whispered during intermission. "I had forgotten how much I loved music and theater." "You should never forget the things you love," Yates said. "Even out here on the ranch, we can have beauty and culture." After that, they made the trip to town more often, attending performances and lectures, buying books and sheet music. Olivia acquired a piano, something she had not owned since leaving Pennsylvania, and the cabin filled with music as she relearned old pieces and taught her children to play. Life was not perfect. There were arguments and disappointments, illness and injury, all the normal struggles of family life. But through it all, Olivia and Yates's love remained constant, the foundation upon which everything else was built. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party, inviting friends and neighbors from miles around. The house was filled with laughter and music, food and dancing. At one point, Yates pulled Olivia aside, leading her out to the porch where they could have a moment of relative quiet. 25 years, he said, shaking his head in wonder. How did we get so lucky? I think we made our own luck, Olivia replied. We chose each other and we kept choosing each other every day since. I would choose you again, Yates said fiercely. 1,000 times over in any life I would always choose you. They stood together on the porch of the cabin that had started it all, listening to their children and grandchildren. Yes, grandchildren now. Thomas and Alice had given them two so far, laughing and celebrating inside. The Montana sky stretched endlessly above them, stars beginning to appear as the sun sank below the horizon. Olivia thought back to that terrified young woman who had stumbled through a blizzard, desperate and lost, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. She could hardly recognize herself in that person. The years had changed her, strengthened her, given her confidence and purpose she had never had before. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, always able to read her moods. "How far we have come. How different my life is from what I imagined it would be. Better or worse, so much better. Better than anything I could have dreamed." She leaned against him, fitting perfectly into his side as she always had. "You know what I realized? That night when I knocked on your door, I was not just running from something. I was running toward this, toward you. I just did not know it yet. Winter brought you to my lonely cabin," Yates said softly, repeating words he had said before. "And in doing so, showed me what I had been missing. I thought I was complete, living alone with my grief and my cattle. I thought I had made my peace with solitude, but I was just existing, not really living. You gave me back my life, Olivia. You and the children, you made everything worth it again." Tears pricked Olivia's eyes, happy tears this time. "We saved each other, I think. You gave me shelter when I needed it most, and I gave you a reason to open your heart again. We healed each other." Inside, someone struck up a waltz on the piano. Yates stood and offered Olivia his hand with exaggerated formality. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Davidson?" "Always, Mr. Davidson. Always." They danced on the porch under the emerging stars, moving to music that drifted out through the open door. They were older now, their hair graying and their bodies showing the wear of hard living and hard work. But in each other's arms, they felt young again, felt like the desperate woman and the lonely cowboy who had found each other in a blizzard and decided to build a life together. As the years continued to pass, Olivia and Yates grew old together gracefully. They watched their children marry and have children of their own. They saw the ranch prosper and grow. They witnessed Montana continue its transformation from wild territory to settled state. Through it all, their love remained the constant, the anchor that held everything else in place. When Olivia was 68 years old, Yates fell ill with pneumonia. For a terrifying week, she thought she might lose him, sitting by his bedside and holding his hand and praying harder than she had ever prayed in her life. But he pulled through, stubborn as ever, refusing to leave her. "I am not going anywhere," he told her when he was finally on the mend. "We have a deal, remember? We are supposed to grow old together." "We are already old," Olivia pointed out, but she was smiling through her tears. "Then older. We are supposed to grow much, much older together, and they did. They lived to see Thomas take over the ranch, to see Emma open her own school in town, to see Samuel travel to California and return with stories of the ocean, to see Rebecca's paintings displayed in galleries in Helena and even San Francisco. They lived to meet a dozen grandchildren and several great-grandchildren, their family tree spreading and branching in ways they never could have imagined that first winter in the cabin. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole extended family gathered for a massive celebration. Olivia and Yates stood together, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, overwhelmed by the legacy they had built together. 50 years, Thomas said in his toast. 50 years of love and partnership, of building a life and a family in this beautiful, harsh land. 50 years of showing all of us what marriage should look like. To Yates and Olivia Davidson, the heart of this family. Everyone raised their glasses, and Olivia felt tears streaming down her face. She looked at Yates and saw his eyes were wet too. They had come so far from that desperate night when she had pounded on his door. They had built something extraordinary from nothing, had created a dynasty from loneliness and loss. When the party finally ended and the last guests had left, Olivia and Yates sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. The cabin had been expanded and improved over the years, but this porch remained, the same spot where Yates had stood the night Olivia arrived. "Do you remember that night?" Olivia asked. "When I showed up half frozen on your doorstep, every detail," Yates said. "I remember thinking you were the most stubborn woman I had ever met. Who else would have kept walking through that storm instead of just lying down and giving up?" "I remember thinking you were terrifying," Olivia admitted. "So stern and serious, I thought you were going to turn me away. I could never have turned you away. Even then, I think some part of me knew you were important, that you were going to change everything." They sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed. Closer by, they could hear their grandchildren playing. The ranch bustled with life and activity, so different from the lonely cabin Yates had once inhabited. "I love you, Olivia," Yates said, the same words he had spoken countless times over 50 years, but still as meaningful as the first time. "I love you too, Yates," Olivia replied. "Thank you for opening your door that night. Thank you for giving me shelter and kindness and eventually love. Thank you for this life." "Thank you for knocking," Yates said. "Thank you for being brave enough to keep going when everything seemed impossible. Thank you for choosing to stay, to build this life with me." As the stars began to appear above them, Olivia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The pain and loss, the hope and faith, the love that had sustained them through everything. She thought about the young woman she had been, fleeing scandal and seeking her lost brother. She thought about what that woman would think if she could see this moment, this life, this legacy. Winter had brought her to his lonely cabin, yes, but it was love that had made her stay. Love that had transformed two broken people into a family, a lonely cabin into a thriving ranch, a desperate flight into a homecoming. The cowboy had finally understood what he had been missing, and so had she. They had been missing each other, the completion that comes from finding the person who fits your jagged edges perfectly. The person who sees your scars and loves you not despite them, but because they are part of your story. As they sat together watching the night descend, Olivia knew that when her time came to leave this world, she would go with no regrets. She had lived fully and loved deeply. She had built something that would last beyond her lifetime, a family and a legacy that would continue for generations. But that was far in the future. For now, she was content to sit with her husband under the Montana stars, grateful for every moment of the extraordinary life they had built together. Winter had brought her to his cabin, but love had given her a home. And that, Olivia thought, was the greatest gift of all.